Welcome back, everyone. We're ready to begin with Unit 4, which is about managing data. And specifically what we're going to learn in this unit is how to subset data sets, so keeping only the variables that you would like to keep in the data set, as well as different ways of combining data sets, so adding cases and adding variables to data sets. Now, before we get into all of this, I need to warn you that in this unit, you need to use your imagination. And you're going to need that imagination for our whirlwind tour of the higher education system here in the United States. So, let's go ahead and click on Managing Data. This brings us to our notes. Again, we have relatively few commands that we're going to study in this unit, but they will keep us very busy as we take our tour. So I'm going to scroll down some, and what you can see here is that we are going to pretend, or at least for most of us, we will be pretending that we are undergraduates and that we are in an honors program working on our honors thesis, and we wish to analyze just a subset of the HS1 data file. And specifically, we're only going to look at those students who are, quote, good readers. Now, who is a good reader? Well, we're going to define that as someone who received a score of 60 or higher on their reading test. So, what we need to do is subset our data set to include only these individuals. Now, I have SAS up and running. I'm going to come down here and click on SAS. And as before, I have closed the results window and the Explorer windows that are typically over here on the left-hand side. I've done this only to maximize the amount of screen space available so that you can see more clearly the program and the log window and all that kind of stuff. Also, I have brought in the entire program from this unit's worth of notes so that you can see the program in its entirety rather than watching me try and type and go so slowly. Okay? So, we have a data set here. And what we're doing up here on this data statement is creating a permanent data set. And this permanent data set is going to be called Good Read, and we are going to put it in the location specified here in quotes. This is where it's located on my hard drive, but you put in whatever path specification that you want. And here you can see that we're going to put it in a directory called Honors. Okay, our set statement is going to be right here, and it appears that I have not done my set statement correctly. That's not going to work for me, so I need to do a little bit of cut and paste right there. And I guess this is a good time to let you know that because the editor is really nothing more than a text editor, you can do that little cut and paste stunt the way that you can in most of the popular word processing programs today. So you can cut and paste things wherever you need to, just like I had to do right there. Okay, so this is the set statement. This is telling us what data set our new data set is going to be based on. And now we have a where statement. And this is where we specify the conditions that we want here. I should point out that you don't need these parentheses if you don't want them. They're included here only to make it easier for you to read. Okay? After we run this data step, we're going to do a proc means, and we're going to use our good read data set right here, and we're just going to do this for the variable read, and that's what's specified here on the var statement. Okay, I'm going to highlight these two. I'm going to come up here to my running person and click, and all sorts of stuff went flashing by us, so let's come back here and look at the log window. And click here and scroll up some. Scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. Okay, so here's the data step that we ran. Looks like we had 56 observations that were read in from this data step where this condition was true. I'm going to scroll down some, and it looks like the proc means ran correctly. Okay, let's come back over here to our output. And so here is the output. We see we have an N of 56. Here is the mean, standard deviation, the minimum, and the maximum. And you notice that this minimum is 60, and that's no coincidence. We specified that this minimum was supposed to be 60. And so we see that everything ran just as we had hoped. Okay, I'm going to come down here to my editor window again and click on this. And I'm going to scroll down some so that we can see the next part of the program. And what we're going to do here is only keep some variables. Okay, so if we would like to keep just some variables, we can use a keep statement. And let's see here. You know, I want to keep the variable ID as well, so I'm just going to type in ID and keep that variable as well. And now I'm going to run both the data step and the proc content so that we can see the result. And you see here that on this data statement we're keeping a file called hskept, and that is the one we're using here on the proc contents. Okay, I'm going to click on my running person. And we look at the proc contents, and we see that we had 4 variables in our data set, and we see that that is ID, read, write, and the variable female. And that is exactly what we requested, so everything looks like it went okay. And you can see right here, here's the name of the data file. Alrighty, now you might think to yourself, well, I have only a few variables that I'd like to drop. I want to keep everything, but I just want to drop a few variables, and I'd really rather not type out all of those variables that I'd like to keep. What do I do? Well, let's come down here to the data editor, or the program editor, excuse me. We'll scroll down some here, and we can see that instead of a keep statement, you can use a drop statement. And now you can just list the variables that you want to drop. We have called this dataset hsDropped. When we do the proc contents, that's the dataset we're going to be looking at. And the way you choose between a keep statement and a drop statement really boils down to your preference, and typically which will require the least amount of typing on your part, or whichever is most convenient. So you can use either one, just whatever you prefer. I'm going to highlight all of those, and now I'm going to click on my running person, and it looks like we're using hsDrop just as we had specified, and we see that SES has been dropped as well as the variable prog. Okay, so we have done that successfully. Let's come back down here to our editor, so I'll click here. I'm going to scroll down some here. And because we have done all of this stuff successfully, well, we have graduated with our honors, and we are now going to move on to graduate school, and we're in a master's program. Okay, so you can see now that our folder has changed from honors to masters, and what we need to do now is combine some data files. And we have been given a file with the data for the males, which we called hsMale, and a different file for the females, which is called hsFemale. And we need to combine these data files together so that we can do our analysis. And you'll realize that what we really need to do is add cases. In other words, we're stacking the data files. Okay, before we get around to our stacking, we're going to run a proc freak, actually 2 of them, one on the hsMale dataset and one here on the hsFemale dataset. And both datasets have the same variable called female, and we'll see how they're different. I'm going to highlight both of these and come up here to my running person and click. And we see here that when the variable female has a value of 1, we have 109. So this is the hsFemale output. I'm going to hit the page up key on my keyboard, and now we see this is the hsMale output, and we have 91 males here. Okay, so that's what we've really got. Now how are we going to stack these data files together? let's come down here to our editor window. Click here. I'm going to scroll down some. Okay, and we see here that we're creating a data file called HS Masters. And you'll see something here that we haven't seen yet, besides another cut and paste error on my part, which I need to correct real quick. So I'll do a control copy and a control paste right there. We have two files listed here on the set statement. Here's the HS male file and the HS female file. And when SAS sees multiple data sets listed on its set statement, it stacks them. Okay, so that's how you stack data files. And you can actually stack a great number of data files together with one set statement. Okay, so you're not limited to two. We just have two here in this example. Okay, I'm going to run both that data step up here and this proc freak, which is going to use the HS Masters data set. This is the one created up here, and we're going to look at the variable female. Highlight both of these and click on my running person, and there we go. So let's have a quick peek at this log. We'll come down here and click on the log window, and I'm going to scroll up a little bit here so that we can see what happened. We had the 91 observations read from the HS male data set. We had 109 observations read from the HS female data set, and now we have the HS Masters data set with the 200 observations and the 11 variables. Okay, that's exactly what we wanted to see, so let's come back here and look at our output. Alrighty, here are our 109 females and our 91 males. Okay, so that is stacking data sets. Let's come back down here to our editor window. Click here, and I'm going to scroll down some more. And now, since we have done this successfully, we have received our master's degree, and we have decided that we're going to go all the way and try for our PhD. Okay, now for this project, we've also been given two data files. However, the situation's a little bit different in that the first file contains the demographic information for our subjects, and we called this data file HS Demo. And the second data file has all the test scores in them, and so we called this data file HS Test. And we need to merge these data files. In other words, we need to set them side by side. Okay, so before we get around to doing this, let's have a little preview of our two data sets. I'm going to run two proc prints here, one on the HS Dem data set and one down here on the HS Test data set. I'll highlight both of these and click on my running person. All right, I'm going to hit the page up key here so that we see the first data set first. Okay, so it looks like we have the variable ID, the variable female, and the variable prog. And page down here, and we see that we have the variable ID, the variable read, and the variable write. Okay, now you notice that both data sets have the variable ID in them, and that is critical. What you need to do when you're doing this kind of merge is have a variable in common in all of the data files that you're going to merge together. Okay, now in our example we're only merging two, but in other situations you may end up merging together multiple data files, 3, 4, 5, however many, and you need to do it in such a way that you will have a common ID variable in the data files that you actually go to merge as you do this. Okay, now let's come back down here to the program editor. Click here, and you need to have that common variable, but you also need to have the variable sorted the same way in both data sets, okay? So that SAS, or in really any statistical package, what it's going to do is match up the rows based on that ID variable. So you need to have that variable sorted the same way in both data sets. So we're going to use proc sort to do that here in SAS. So I have listed out the data set that I want to sort, and I have used the out option. And this is going to save the output data set. Okay, so instead of overwriting this data set, I'm creating this new output data set, and this one is a temporary data set. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing down here. I've given it a different name. So this is the demographics, this is going to be the tests, and both of them will be sorted by ID. I'm going to highlight both of these and click on my running person. And you'll see that it doesn't look like a whole lot happened. And that's because proc sort is again one of those kinds of procs that doesn't really produce any output that SAS is going to display to you. Okay, but we can come down here and look at our log file, and we see that the proc sort for the test data set went okay. We're going to scroll up some here, and here is our HSDEM data set, and it looks like this went okay too. I don't see any errors or warnings or anything like that, so it appears that everything went as planned. Okay, back to the editor window and scrolling down a little bit more, and here we have the data step that's actually going to do this merge for us. Okay, we are creating a new data set that's going to be called HSDIS, and we are going to use a merge statement here. And we are going to merge the temporary data file dem with the temporary data file test. Now, what are these options in here? Well, these options are going to tell us from which data set the observation came. Okay, this will be very important if there are some observations in one data set that don't have matches over in the other data set. Now down here you see these two statements, and you notice that this variable is the same as this, and this variable is the same as this. This in equals, this is SAS keyword. Okay, so these are the SAS keywords, and then these are actually variable names. The problem is that these variables cease to exist when the data step finishes running. Okay, well that's not going to do us a lot of good, because if they cease to exist when the data step ends, well how are we ever going to see them? Well, we're going to see them because we're going to give them a name as a variable, and then it will be an actual variable that we'll be able to see, not the SAS temporary variable that's being created right up here. So one is going to be called from dem, and then this will be from test, and this will be 2. And this goes back to what I was saying in the previous unit about new variable equals old variable. If you switch the ordering of these two variable names, it's not going to work. Okay. Finally, we have the by statement, and this tells SAS what variable you're merging on. Okay, so that is that, and now let's scroll down just, actually I'm going to make this window just a smidge bigger. There you go. Now we can see the proc print of the HSDIS data file, and so this will tell us a little bit about whether or not our merge worked. Okay, all of that stuff done, highlight everything we want and come up here to our running person and click. Alrighty, lots of output, but before we get there, I think it's important to look over here at our log window. Click down here, and I'm going to scroll up some here, and this tells us that we had 19 observations from the temporary data set dem and 18 observations from the temporary data set test. Okay, that means that somewhere something didn't match up exactly right, and we need to look for this in our proc print output. So I'm going to come back down here and click on the output so that we can see it all. And here are those from variables that we created in the program. And when it was true that the row or this observation came from this data set, you get a value of 1. When it's not true, you get a value of 0. Okay, So that's why you have these missing values right here, because this observation didn't come from this data set that was associated with this. So this was the DEM data set. Okay, we had two observations that were in this data set here, in the DEM data set, that were not in the test data set. And so when that was the case, we got missing values for those observations. Okay, so let's see here. I hope that makes sense to everybody. Let's move on down here to our editor window again, and we're going to scroll down just a little bit more and see the rest of our program. Okay, this is just another proc print using a var statement so that we only see the variables ID from DEM and from test. And then this is a proc freak, and this could be very useful because this is going to give us the crosstab of these two variables that we created to tell us where the observations are coming from. And because we have a star in between these two observations, we're going to get a two-way table or a crosstab. I'm going to highlight both of these procs and come up to my running person and click. Okay, I'm going to use the page up key here. And so here's the results of the proc print. And again, this is just a subset of the variables that we saw previously. Pretty much the same thing. Okay, page down. And here's the crosstab. Okay, so there were no observations that were in either of the data sets. Okay, that makes some sense to us. There was one that was in this cell. There are two that were from the DEM and not from test, and so 17 that were from both of the data sets. Okay, and then these are your row totals and your column totals. And this is basically what you were seeing up above in the proc freak. So I'm going to page up here, and this is basically, here's the two that was in that one cell, here's the one that was in the other cell, and then these were the 17 observations that were in both data sets. So you page down here, and this is basically just another way of displaying these data to you. Okay, well, the good news is that we did this successfully. So now we have all passed, and we all now have our PhDs. And I think that this ends the fantasy portion of this class, and it also ends Unit 4.